To get Comelec's reactions for these petitions, we have on the show today Chairman George Garcia. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Matters.
Good morning, Ma'am Gretchen. Good morning to all the televiewers.
Okay, Chairman, unahin po natin itong mga balitang binasa ko lang. Si Senator Bong Revilla will file against the trolls that spread fake news on the PDAF. Would that do anything to reverse the results, or is that just a moot?
Well, on the part of the Commission on Elections, surely after the proclamation of the winning candidates, we can no longer entertain disqualification cases, because we can only do that if there is a pending disqualification case prior to the election and even prior to the proclamation of the winning candidates. If there is any other case that can be filed after the proclamation, then it can only be an election offense. However, we do not want to foreclose any other remedy that may be availed of by a candidate who wanted to at least find out what really happened during the election. So kung yung ipapile po ay tungkol sa mga misinformation, disinformation, or fake news, or cyber libel. Cyber libel is a crime by itself under the revised penal code and under special law. And at the same time, because we have what we call as a resolution on the use of social media, artificial intelligence, and such other platforms, then that can also be a ground for an election offense to be filed before the Commission on Elections.
So ito po ay so hindi na pwede ma-disqualify is what you're saying. Dapat po ay and in the case that the Comelec rules for the one who filed an election offense, will that change things? Could that change things in terms of getting Senator Bong Revilla into the Senate, or may mga ganun ba na for example a sitting mayor or another official?
Just to be very clear, Ma'am Gretchen, and this is without referring to the personality that you mentioned or to the case that he or she may be filing before the commission. It's like this actually. Kapag ka naproklama na yung isang kandidato for local position, hindi nangangahulugan na porke dumating na yung June 30, mawawala ng jurisdiction ng Comelec. The Comelec will still retain jurisdiction. Even if nakaupo na, nakapag-assume na yung local candidates, the Comelec can still remove that local candidate so long as there is a pending disqualification case against him or against. That is different when it comes to the national candidates. The national candidates, Ma'am Gretchen, if there is a disqualification case filed before the election or before the proclamation, and dumating ang June 30, the Comelec will be losing jurisdiction. The Supreme Court in the case of Reyes versus the Commission on Election clarified that in order for the Comelec to be divested of each jurisdiction to hear disqualification cases, 3 requisites must be present. Number 1, proclamation. Number 2, oath. That can be an oath before a barangay chairman or even a notary public. And thirdly, there must be assumption to office. Under the Constitution, assumption to office of a duly elected official shall forthwith come on June 30 noon at 12:01. So pagdating ng 12:01, ma'am, the Comelec will be losing jurisdiction. Under Article 6, Section 17 of the Constitution, it's clearly provided that the House of Representatives Electoral Tribunal shall be the sole judge of all election returns and qualifications of the members of the House of Representatives. In the same manner, the same constitutional provision provides that the Senate Electoral Tribunal shall be the sole judge of all elections, returns, and qualifications of the members of the Senate. Meaning, sole, according to the Supreme Court, is to the exclusion of any other court, even including the Supreme Court. So in which case, therefore, pagdating po ng June 30, the Comelec will be losing jurisdiction. However, in the case of the party list, as far as the nominees are concerned, the Supreme Court in the case of Palparan versus HRET and Abayon versus HRET, the Supreme Court emphasized that the members of Congress are the nominees themselves, not the party list. But the candidates are the party list organizations or political parties. That being the case, the Comelec can still entertain petitions to disqualify party list organizations. Pero pagdating ng June 30, hands-off na kami, Ma'am Gretchen, sa mga nominees nila kasi magiging miyembro na sila ng House of Representatives, but not in the case of their organizations or political parties or party lists. Yan yung recent case ng Anwaray versus the Commission on Elections.
Dahil pinuntahan nyo na rin po yan, no? I had former Congressman Ronald Cardema talk about their case. Sabi nila, bakit daw ngayon parang pinag-iinitan sila? Noong 2019, pinayagan naman silang tumuloy kahit na tinanggal na, disqualify na si Cardema. At noong 2022, pinayagan din silang tumuloy. And they were not informed when the party list were being verified in terms of being legal to run for the 2025 elections. What would you say to that?
Well, to be very transparent first, I did not participate in the deliberation as far as to suspend the proclamation of the party list that you mentioned. Actually, on the issue of being singled out, we have to remember na hindi lang po sila ang nasuspend ng proclamation ng commission. Dalawa po silang party list na nasuspend ng proclamation. And when it comes to to those who are running naman for other positions, 20 candidates at may mga kilalang mga personalities din ang nasuspend ng proclamation ng commission. So meaning to say, maybe it's really wrong to say that na masyado naman silang na separate or na prejudice nitong action ng commission. So but again,
pero
I did not
Chairman, pero Chairman, pero hindi po ba yung kaso ni Ronald Cardema ay hiwalay doon sa registration ng kanyang partido? Ibig sabihin kung ano yung actions ni Cardema, he does it as an individual. I mean, should that be separate?
When the proclamation is to be made in favor of a party list, nakalagay din po kasi yung pangalan ng nominees, Ma'am Gretchen, and therefore you cannot proclaim the nominees without proclaiming the party list. So you cannot separate the two, the party list and the nominees.
Okay.
They must go hand in hand. In fact, you can proclaim the party list, but you may refuse to proclaim the nominees. But when you proclaim the nominees, surely you will have to proclaim the party list. In this case, because the issue pertains to the qualification of the party list itself as to the requirements for purposes of accreditation. I think the case, that is the main meat of the controversy in the division of the Comelec. And therefore, tama naman po Ma'am Gretchen, 2019 pa yan, 19, 20, 21. Bakit naman, I cannot answer for what happened during those years. But of course, under the present leadership, we have to resolve cases. Pagpasok ko dyan, cases involving 16, 19, and 2022 elections, we resolved almost all of them. Ito na lang yung mga natitira. And so perhaps it's really high time that this case should be resolved with finality so that masettle na ito once and for all yung sa issue nila. Actually, the party list that you mentioned, humaharap siya sa dalawang cases. But the most important one is the 2019 case because yun yung nagtagal na. And again, I'm hoping that they can appreciate the fact that the Comelec is taking advantage of this situation to release a decision and so that whoever will win or lose can go to a higher court.
Well, Chairman, why wasn't this brought up at an earlier time, before the elections?
Because under our rules, you cannot, well, I don't know kung sa mismong division ng Comelec namin. Siyempre, Ma'am Gretchen, kanya-kanya, I cannot interfere because the chairman of the Comelec does not participate in the division. It's up to them whether to resolve or not to resolve. And number two, so long as there is no motion from any camp to suspend any proclamation or whatever, so it's actually the division that recommended for the proclamation, suspension of the proclamation of the party list. But again, I did not participate in the deliberation.
Okay.
However, on the issue as to whether pwede pa bang habulin ng isang party list kahit na nakapag-participate na, yun po yung pinaka-lesson ngayon ng kaso ng Anwaray versus the Commission on Elections. Because in the case of Anwaray, ilang beses sila nakapag-participate, Ma'am Gretchen, and then only to find out later that their accreditation should be cancelled. And it was affirmed by the Supreme Court most recently, just a matter of several months ago lang, yung decision na yun.
Okay. Mukhang mahaba-habang diskusyon pa yan, but we'll leave it to the courts. No? Let's go to former President Rodrigo Duterte, who is in The Hague. DILG Secretary John Vic Remulla said that although he will ask for permission from the ICC for him to be able to take his oath, ang sabi din niya, there is no working from home. Work from Hague pala. There will be no work from Hague arrangement. That while he recognizes the victory of Duterte, the former president needs to be physically present in the country to fulfill his duties as a duly elected government official. What does the law say?
Well, as I had been saying, the duty of the Comelec ends upon or after proclamation. Once na nakapag-proclaim na kami, Ma'am Gretchen, I had been saying that the duty now belongs to another department of government, in which case, truly, it is the Department of Interior and local government as to who should sit, as to whether somebody should be allowed to sit, somebody should be allowed to post the powers and function of the office na tinakbuhan niya. As far as the Comelec is concerned, tapos na yung duty namin, ma'am. We proclaim the duly elected mayor of the city simply because there is no final judgment of conviction under Section 68 of the Omnibus Election Code. So wala naman kami magagawa so long as walang particular case, walang nagsababar sa amin, walang nagsasabi sa amin, walang nagpo-prohibit sa amin, or even a restraining order to proclaim the winning candidate. As to whether he can really assume, that is for the DILG to resolve in the meantime.
So sila po ang magdedesisyon dito, the sole body, to decide on the fate of Mayor Duterte. Okay.
Yes, although the local government code provides for a temporary succession in case of temporary vacancy to the office.
Which will be the vice mayor of the city, which is Baste Duterte.
Yes, Ma'am Gretchen. Temporarily, he will have to assume pending the eligibility of the duly elected mayor.
Okay. Chairman, the Makabayan Bloc has filed before the Congress a petition to look into the more than 1,000 election-related anomalies, of which 50% of the 1,500 verified violations are related to the automated counting machines. So ang niraise po nilang issue, ito po yung ink smudging, paper jams, overly sensitive scanners. Ang tanong ko po dito ay hindi po ba nakita yung mga problemang ito doon po sa dry run natin, and what would you say to that?
Ma'am Gretchen, ang question siguro is the most important question. Did it affect the counting of the votes? Did it affect even the voting by our voters? 82.2% of the Filipino voters went to the precincts during the election, the highest in the history of a midterm election. 82.2. Ibig sabihin, Ma'am Gretchen, 17.8% lang ang hindi nakaboto ng mga kababayan natin. They trooped to the polls. In fact, ang pinakadapat na tanong natin, hindi yung machines. Ang tanong natin, bakit ganun kahaba ang pila? Maybe because of the enthusiasm of the Filipinos, or maybe because we were given short of budget. Hindi naman kami nabigyan ng Kongreso ng budget. And we have 800 to 1,000 voters lining up sa bawat presinto. And that's why kita nyo yung dami ng botante. Yung machines, Ma'am Gretchen, wala tayong mag-function na machine. Yung mga machines natin, meron kaming pinalitan more or less mga 500 machines. Not because nasira yung machine, but because may nakita kami indication. For example, tama yung sabi nyo, nag-reject na yung machine, pinalitan kaagad namin. We have more or less 16,000 contingency machine. The first time in the history of our automated election na ganun kadami. So we have contingency machine to replace yung mga palagay natin nagkakaroon ng problem. Pero yung sinasabi nila na merong smudging, yung manipis yung papel, it did not affect the results of the election. Yung sinasabi nilang overvoting, that's overvoting, hindi siya tao. Overvoting, hindi siya votes yun eh. Yung 17 million votes yun. And 17 million should be divided by 12. Because 12 candidates did not benefit from a particular ballot. So 17 million divided by 12, that's almost 1.3 million. 1.3 million is only 2% of 57 million who voted during the election, which is within the range. And therefore,
pero Chairman, hindi po ba napakahalaga nung 1.3 million na yun? Lalong-lalo na sa isang mahigpit na senatorial race. Significant pa rin yung numero na yun, hindi po ba?
1.3 million, even on the assumption that a candidate will get 0, the difference between the number 12 and number 13 is 1.4 million. So mukhang napaka-impossible naman na yung number 12 ay makakakuha ng 0 doon sa 1.3 million na mga botante na nag-overvote. And Ma'am Gretchen, it's not the fault of the machine that the voters had overvoted. If, for example, ako nga ma'am, nung bumoto ako, akala ko 12 na, yung pala magte-30 na, eksakto. So it's never the mistake of the machine. If the voter will vote 13 instead of 12, the voter can be voting for 11.
To be honest, when I came out to vote, isang katanungan ko, bakit ganito yung pentel pen? Parang talagang nagsasmudge, ano? So napakadali nung posibilidad na mapunta yung marker mo sa kabilang side ng pahina o kaya sa ibang parts ng balota.
Pag tinignan yung balota sa likod, wala siyang eksaktong pangalan ng isang kandidato o party list na katapat eksakto ng mismong kandidato. We made sure of that. Meaning to say, even if it will not blot at the back, even on the assumption, for the sake of argument, that the pen will blot at the back, it will not be at exactly on the same circle as that of the other candidate for party list at the back.
Wait, Chairman, there were also those reports of mismatch from the actual ballots to what is printed in the VVPAT receipts. I know you said there is no evidence of that, but isn't it worth looking into also? Dahil yung mga reports na ito, kumari dito sa isang presinto, meron tayong reports ng mismatch. Maaari bang magkaroon ng manual counting dun sa mga presinto na yon to be able to address those reports and assert the integrity of the elections?
The best evidence will always be the random manual audit as provided for by law. The random manual audit is in place since 2010, and since 2010 it has been participated by practically the losing candidates, the Citizens Arm, and it's the random manual audit committee is headed by the Philippine Statistics Authority, the DepEd, the NAMFREL, PPCRB, Lente, including the PICPAP, the Philippine Institute of Certified Public Accountants. So ngayon, ongoing ang kanilang random manual audit. Nakakamahigit na sila ng 200 ballot boxes out of the 700 ballot boxes electronically selected in the entire country. And then for that is what is provided for by law. When it comes to manual count, that can only happen in case there is an election protest. And so far in the Comelec right now, we have more or less, we have less than 20 election protests, I think, filed before us for the position of governor and city mayors. We do not know if there are other protests for local positions, but certainly there will be protests likewise for the House of Representatives later on when somebody will become member of the House by June 30. So,
kasi the
time.
whole of the election day, I remember the Comelec was seeing kung meron pong mga mismatch, i-report na lamang no dito sa mga Comelec officers in the precincts. So for those who want to file an election protest, where do they do so?
Well, in the case of the municipal position, they can file the protest before the regional trial court. Tapos na yun, Ma'am Gretchen, 10 days after the proclamation, that's the only period by which you can file an election protest. Just like also in the commission election. For provincial, city, and regional positions, the protest should be filed and lodged before the commission election 10 days after the proclamation. For the members of the House of Representatives, that can only be filed 15 days after the assumption to office, which is more or less by July 15, yan ang deadline nila. Sa Senate Electoral Tribunal for the position of senators, that can only be filed again 15 days after the assumption to office, which is likewise July 15.
Yun nga lang, sino po ba ang magte-take ng pains to file an election protest, gumastos para dito, lalong-lalo na kung isang simpleng mamamayang Pilipino ka lang, ano? Hindi ba dapat na-address din yun within the election day kung meron silang concern when it comes to their ballot and kung nagre-reflect ba ng tama yung boto nila?
Well, nasa law po kasi, Ma'am Gretchen, because if you're going to entertain everything, wala tayo mapoproclaim. Baka nga tama talaga na wag na lang tayo mag-automated election. Annual election na nga lang. Yun nga yung
actually, Chairman, si Attorney Israelito Torion, I had him on the show and he said that a recount is needed since Comelec did not follow what is in the law. Section 31 of RA 9369, if I'm not mistaken, says that in reading the official ballots during the counting, the chairman, poll clerk, and a third member shall assume positions to provide watchers and members of the public as may be conveniently accommodated in the polling place an unimpeded view of the ballot being readied by the chairman. So, ang sinasabi po niya na sa batas daw natin na alongside this automated counting, meron ding dapat tinitignan ng mga viewers yung pagbibilang ng mga boto na yun.
I doubt whether, of course, I cannot engage, I'm hoping that they should not be engaged in that discussion because they already filed a case in the Supreme Court and therefore that's sub judice. But the most important one is when you read Section 31, you have to read the entirety of the entire Republic Act 9369, including even the title. That's full automated election. If that is really the case, if Section 31 is really the rule rather than the exception, then why is it that 2010 we had not been conducting a hybrid type of election, meaning manually counting and even automating the election. And number two, you will be needing additional budget for that. If you're going to conduct manual counting at the same time automated counting. Try to imagine our budget was even slashed by 4 billion pesos. And that's the reason why we have 800 to 1,000 voters per precincts. And at the same time, there should be an amendment of the law, Republic Act 9369, emphasize what is the procedure in conducting a manual recount of the ballots. So perhaps the proper remedy is really legislation. And since there's already a case in the Supreme Court, then we'll just wait for the ruling of the Supreme Court in this.
Chairman, bilang panghuling tanong, kasi wala na po tayong oras, no? What is your learning when it comes to online voting? There was a low turnout abroad, about 7.19% in North and Latin America, 24.15% in Asia Pacific, lower than the 34.88%. Ano po mga learnings natin doon? Hindi po ba naging effective yung ganitong klaseng system?
No, we expected that. 2019, you had 18% voters turnout. In 2022, you have 40.59%, the highest in the history of overseas voting. The reason is because perhaps the interest of the people when it comes to midterm election is not that high, but it will have to peak whenever there will be presidential elections. So you expect a higher voters turnout by 2028. And that's the reason why even the number of voters who actually were able to register for 2 years were so low. Likewise, only about 200,000 for 2 years.
Hindi po ba may kalituhan din dito sa bagong sistema na ito? Kasi mataas ang turnout ng voting dito sa Pilipinas, pero abroad, isn't it also because of the new system in place?
No, not because of the system, Ma'am Gretchen. Simply because most of our compatriots abroad, especially those who are living in the areas that you mentioned, we're applying for permanent status as a resident there or even citizenship. And that's also the findings most of the time of our post abroad, simply because they do not want they do not want the election compromising their application for a permanent status in the country where they are residing or where they want to get citizenship.
All right. Okay. Maraming salamat for answering the questions. And thank you so much for your time today. Sana po ay nakapagpapahinga na po kayo kahit papaano after all of this. But possibly by June 30 pa rin. Katulad na sabi nyo. Okay. Maraming salamat. We have Comelec Chairman George Garcia joining us on Morning Matters today.